The crystalline walls of the council chamber caught the light of 1,000 distant stars and scattered it across the assembled delegates. 200 species sat in their designated sections, some breathing oxygen, others suspended in nutrient tanks, and a few existing as pure energy, contained within magnetic fields. They had gathered for what many considered a formality, though Ambassador Chen Wei knew better. She stood at the speaker's platform, her small human frame dwarfed by the massive amphitheater. Behind her floated holographic displays showing 50 years of human contribution to the galactic community, medical breakthroughs that had saved billions, cultural exchanges that had enriched dozens of civilizations, peacekeeping missions where human soldiers had given their lives protecting worlds they'd never even visited. Honored Council, Chenny began, her voice amplified to reach every corner of the chamber. Humanity has served faithfully as probationary members for 5 decades. We have followed every protocol, respected every tradition, and contributed far beyond what was required of us. Today, we formally request full membership status. A low murmur rippled through the assembly. Chen had expected this. 50 years was nothing to species that measured their histories in millennia. The Krev ascendancy had been part of the Council for 8,000 years. The Luminous Collective claimed membership since the Council's founding, over 10,000 years ago. From the highest tier, where the eldest races sat in positions of honor, Councillor Vexthar rose. He was Krev, his forearms folded across his chitinous chest, his compound eyes reflecting Chen's image 100 times over. When he spoke, his mandibles clicked with what Chen had learned to recognize as contempt. Ambassador Chen, Vexthar said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. Your species has indeed been active during your probationary period. However, the Council must consider not merely what you have done, but what you are. Chen's jaw tightened, but she remained silent. This was the moment she'd been dreading. Humans are violent, Vexthar continued, gesturing to one of the holographic displays. With a wave of his upper arm, he dismissed Chen's carefully prepared presentation and replaced it with images from Earth's history, wars, genocides, environmental destruction. Your own planet bears the scars of your aggression. You nearly destroyed yourselves before you even reached your own moon. That was centuries ago, Chen interjected. We've grown since then. We've evolved. Have you? Another voice joined the discussion. This one belonged to Sarinel of the Luminous Collective, beings of living light who considered themselves the galaxy's moral compass. Just last year, human colonists on Kepler 442b engaged in armed conflict with the Talesian miners over resource disputes, a dispute that we mediated and resolved peacefully, Chen countered, without a single casualty. After you dispatched warships to enforce your mediation, Sarinet replied, her light pulsing with what might have been amusement or disdain. You see conflict and your first instinct is to reach for weapons. This is precisely why many of us question your readiness. The chamber erupted in debate. Species that had benefited from human aid spoke in their defense. The Arxian Trade Collective noted that human commerce had enriched dozens of frontier worlds. The Dreamweavers, philosophical beings who communicated through shared visions, spoke of the unique beauty they'd found in human art and literature. But the eldest races held more sway, and they were united in their skepticism. They are too emotional, declared the representative of the Throne Eternal, a species that had long ago transferred their consciousness into crystalline matrices, abandoning biological form entirely. They make decisions based on feelings rather than logic. Anger, love, fear, these are weaknesses, not strengths. Chen wanted to scream. Yes, humans felt deeply. Yes, they loved fiercely and mourned genuinely. But wasn't that what made life worth living? She looked around the chamber at species who had become so ancient, so set in their ways that they'd forgotten what passion felt like. The debate raged for hours. Chen presented counter-arguments, cited statistics, and called upon allied species to testify on humanity's behalf. But she could feel the tide turning against them. The fear in the room was palpable. Not fear of what humans had done, but fear of what they might become. Finally, Bexathar raised all four arms, calling for silence. The chamber obeyed instantly. He had served on the council for over 300 years, and his word carried immense weight. "I have heard enough," he announced. "Ambassador Chen, your species has undeniable potential. That is precisely what concerns us. You are young, impulsive, and powerful. You are children playing with fire in a house made of kindling. The Council has maintained peace for 10,000 years by embracing stability, caution, and wisdom. Humanity embodies none of these virtues. Wisdom comes from experience," Chen said quietly. "How can we gain that experience if you refuse to give us a chance?" "Some lessons," Vexthar replied, "are too dangerous to teach. I call for a vote." The chamber fell silent. Holographic panels appeared before each delegate, glowing softly and awaiting their input. Chen's heart pounded as she watched the votes register. Each rejection felt like a physical blow. When the final tally appeared, in the center of the chamber, Chen had to steady herself against the podium. 187 against 13 in favor. It wasn't just a rejection, it was a humiliation, but Vexthar wasn't finished. Furthermore, he continued, "The Council has determined that humanity's probationary status will be revoked. You will have 10 standard cycles to withdraw from all Council territories. Your embassies will be closed, your trade agreements voided, your people will return to your own space, and you will no longer be welcome in ours." The chamber erupted again, this time in chaos. Even some of those who had voted against membership hadn't expected this extreme measure. The Arxians were shouting protests. The Dreamweavers dimmed with what Chen recognized as sorrow. Chen stood at the podium, numb. They weren't just rejecting humanity's application. They were expelling them entirely, casting them out like criminals. She thought of the 50 years her species had worked to earn their place here. The sacrifices made. The soldiers who had died protecting Council worlds. The scientists who had shared their discoveries freely. The diplomats who had learned hundreds of languages and customs just to communicate respectfully. All of it meant nothing. Chen gathered her notes slowly, deliberately. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her run from this chamber in tears. When she reached the exit, she turned back one final time. "You'll regret this," she said, her voice carrying across the now quiet chamber. "Not because we'll make you, not because we'll seek revenge or wage war against you, but because you'll realize what you've lost. You'll understand too late what you've forsaken." Vexthar's mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter. "Is that a threat, Ambassador?" "No," Chen replied. "It's a tragedy. You're so afraid of what we might become that you've refused to see what we already are. Goodbye, Counselor. I hope your peace brings you joy." She left the chamber with her head held high, even as her heart broke. Behind her, the Council moved on to other business as if humanity had never mattered at all. Within weeks, human ships began their withdrawal from Council space. Embassies were packed up, trade routes abandoned. 50 years of integration unwound in a matter of months. Earth and its 47 colony worlds closed their borders. The gates that had once welcomed Council species now stood sealed, and in Satyam, the darkness beyond known space, humanity began to build something new, something the Council would one day desperately need. 5 years had passed since humanity's expulsion, and the Council had almost forgotten them entirely. The economic boom that followed the redistribution of human trade routes had convinced most species that the decision had been correct. Without humanity's chaotic presence, Council space seemed more peaceful, more orderly. But Silkubines, a young trader from the Arxian collective, couldn't shake her unease. She stood in her small ship's cargo bay, staring at a quantum communicator that shouldn't exist. The device was illegal, a remnant of her friendship with a human named Marcus Chen. They had met during humanity's probationary period, bonded over shared interests in ancient Earth music and Arxian poetry. When the expulsion happened, Marcus had given her this device, a way to stay in touch across the vast distances. For 3 years, they'd exchanged messages regularly. Marcus told her about the withdrawal, about the sadness that had settled over the human colonies. Silk told him about the Council's self-congratulation, about how quickly they'd moved to erase any trace of human influence. Then, 2 years ago, The messages stopped. Silk had tried everything. She'd sent dozens of communications through the illegal device. She'd attempted to visit the border of human space only to find it sealed tighter than a neutron star's core. No ships went in. No signals came out. Human space had gone completely dark. Now, standing before the Council's Intelligence Committee, Silk shared her concerns with beings who seemed more annoyed than alarmed. "Let me understand this correctly," said Committee Chair Velcros, a serpentine creature whose species prided itself on logic. "You maintained illegal contact with humans after their expulsion, and now you're concerned because they've stopped responding?" "It's more than that," Silk insisted, her three arms gesturing emphatically. "It's not just me. All the Arxian traders who worked with human colonies report the same thing. Complete silence. We sent probes to their border worlds. They're abandoned." "Abandoned?" Velcross's hood flared slightly, the first sign of interest. "Completely empty. The colonies on Kepler 442b, Proxima Centauri C, TRAPPIST-1e, all of them. Stripped clean. No people, no technology, nothing. It's like they just packed everything up and vanished." The committee members exchanged glances. One of them, a luminous collective representative, pulsed thoughtfully. "Perhaps they've simply consolidated their population, retreated to their core worlds to rebuild their society away from council influence." "That's what I thought at first," Silk said. "But our deep space listening posts have picked up something strange. Coded transmissions from the galactic rim. The encryption signature is definitely human, but we can't decipher it. The transmissions are constant, coming from coordinates that shouldn't have any habitable systems." Velcros dismissed the concern with a wave of his tail. "Humans were always prone to dramatic gestures. They're likely sulking in some distant corner of space, building monuments to their wounded pride. Let them. We have more important matters to discuss." Silk left the meeting frustrated. The council refused to see what seemed obvious to her. Humanity wasn't hiding. They were preparing. That night she tried the quantum communicator one more time, not expecting any response. To her shock, the device activated. Marcus's face appeared on the screen, though he looked different. Older, harder, and there was something else. His right eye gleamed with a faint metallic sheen, and when he moved, she caught glimpses of circuitry beneath his skin. "Marcus?" she whispered. "What happened to you?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his altered eye. "Silk, it's good to see you, friend. I don't have much time. This channel isn't as secure as we thought. Where did you go? What are you doing out there?" Marcus glanced over his shoulder, as if checking something off-screen. "We're building something. Something the council said we couldn't be trusted with. They were afraid of our potential, Silk. So we decided to show them what we're really capable of." "Marcus, you're scaring me. What kind of building? Weapons?" "Among other things." He leaned closer to the camera, his expression intense. "They called us children playing with fire, so we learned to master the flames. We learned to become the fire itself." Silk's 3 hearts beat faster. "The council was wrong to cast you out." "I know that." "Many of us know that. But whatever you're planning—" "We're not planning anything," Marcus interrupted. "We're just evolving, becoming what we need to be. The galaxy is a dangerous place, Silk. The council has been lucky for 10,000 years, protected by isolation and the fear they inspire. But luck runs out." Before Silk could respond, alarms blared in the background on Marcus's end. He cursed, something he'd rarely done in all their years of friendship. "I have to go. They're calling us to the frontier. There's work to be done." He paused, his expression softening slightly. "Goodbye, friend. Watch the void. When the darkness comes, remember that we're still out here, still human, even if we don't look like it anymore." The transmission cut out, leaving Silk alone in her cargo bay with more questions than answers. She tried to reach the council again, to warn them that something significant was happening in human space, but they wouldn't listen. When she persisted, suggesting that the council should at least monitor the situation, Velcros threatened to charge her with maintaining illegal contact with an expelled species, so Silk did the only thing she could. She began quietly gathering information, building a network of traders and explorers who had worked with humans. They shared stories, pooled their data, and tried to piece together what was happening. The Dreamweavers proved the most helpful. 2 of their philosophers had visited human space during the probationary period, forming deep connections with human artists and thinkers. Since the expulsion, they'd been having visions. disturbing beautiful visions of what they called metal forests growing in the void. Silk met with them in their sanctuary, a space station that existed partially outside normal reality, allowing the Dreamweavers to move freely between dimensions. "The humans are transforming," explained Whisper of Tomorrow, a Dreamweaver whose form shifted constantly between states of matter. "We see them in our visions, merging with their machines, reaching beyond the limitations of flesh. They're building ships unlike anything in known space, structures that shouldn't be possible." "Are they preparing for war?" Silk asked. "No," said Dream of Yesterday, Whisper's partner. "They're preparing for survival. They see something coming that we don't, something terrible." Silk reported this to the council, but they dismissed it as Dreamweaver mysticism. The Dreamweavers, after all, existed partially outside of time and space. Their visions were notoriously difficult to interpret and rarely useful for practical governance. Meanwhile, the council celebrated. Without humanity's destabilizing presence, they had entered what they called a new golden age. Trade flourished. Disputes were resolved through traditional diplomatic channels. The younger species learned to respect the wisdom of the eldest races. Councillor Vexthar gave speeches about the correctness of their decision, about how the council had protected itself from a potential threat. His popularity soared among the conservative factions. But in the deep places, in the spaces between stars, human transmissions continued. Growing stronger, growing more complex, and those few who listened carefully could detect something in those signals, not aggression or anger, but urgency. 3 years after Marcus's final message, Silk received one last transmission on her illegal communicator. It wasn't from Marcus. It was automated. A simple text message that appeared on her screen in the middle of the night. "The silence is ending. When the darkness comes, remember we were friends. Remember we saved each other once. Hold on to that. You'll need it." Silk never learned who sent the message. The communicator burned out immediately after, its quantum entanglement broken permanently. She kept the dead device anyway, a reminder that somewhere out there humanity was still watching, still waiting. The council continued its business, blind to the gathering storm. They had made their choice 5 years ago, and they saw no reason to question it. Peace reigned in council space, and peace was all that mattered. In the darkness beyond their borders, in the places where no council ship dared venture, humanity built their future. And when that future finally revealed itself, the galaxy would never be the same. The warning came from the Melodian Harmony, a peaceful species known throughout the galaxy for their musical culture and philosophical wisdom. Their distress signal was unlike anything the council had received in living memory, raw with terror and confusion. "Something's coming through the dark. Ships but not ships. Alive. Hungry. They're eating our worlds." By the time council forces arrived at the Melodian system, it was already too late. 3 planets had been stripped to their cores, their atmospheres consumed, their oceans drained. What remained looked like skeletal remains, dead worlds picked clean by some massive predator. The council fleet found the predators still feeding on the 4th planet. Ships, if they could be called that, covered the world like a disease. They were organic, pulsing with bioluminescence, connected by strands of living tissue that stretched between them like a web. As the council ships approached, they could see smaller organisms swarming across the planet's surface, breaking down everything they touched into raw materials. Admiral Treshka, a veteran Krev commander with 2 centuries of experience, had never seen anything like it. He ordered his fleet to fire, to drive the invaders away from what little remained of the Melodian civilization. The invaders responded by turning their attention to the council fleet. Within minutes, Treshka realized he'd made a terrible mistake. The organic ships moved in ways that violated every principle of physics he understood. They folded space around themselves, appeared and disappeared like ghosts. And when council weapons struck them, they simply absorbed the energy and grew stronger. The battle lasted 17 minutes. When it ended, 60% of Treshka's fleet was gone. The surviving ships retreated in disorder, carrying news that would shake the council to its foundation. The Volkreth swarm had arrived in known space. Emergency sessions were called. Intelligence teams worked around the clock, analyzing every scrap of data from the battle. What they learned was terrifying. The Volkreth were a hive mind species from dark space, regions of the galaxy so distant and hostile that no council species had ever explored them. They consumed entire star systems, breaking down all matter into base components to fuel their expansion. And they were heading directly toward Council core territories. Councillor Vexthar, now in his 4th century of life, stood before the assembled council with mandibles clicking in barely controlled panic. Around him, 200 species argued, blamed, and desperately tried to find solutions to a problem unlike any they'd faced before. "We must mobilize everything," declared Sarinel of the Luminous Collective. "Every ship, every weapon, every soldier. This threat could destroy us all. Our military forces are designed for peacekeeping and border patrol," countered Velcros. "We haven't fought a real war in over 1,000 years. Our weapons are outdated. Our tactics are rusty. How can we possibly stand against this?" The question hung in the air like a death sentence. The council had grown complacent, fat on centuries of peace. Their military existed more as a symbol than a real fighting force. Against the Volkreth swarm, they were lambs facing wolves. The swarm advanced through council space like a plague. The Crimson Nebula, a region famous for its beauty and home to a dozen mining colonies, fell in a week. The council sent their best remaining fleets, commanded by Vexthar himself, hoping that traditional tactics and superior numbers would turn the tide. The Battle of the Crimson Nebula became legendary for all the wrong reasons. Council forces fought bravely, but they were fighting an enemy that adapted with terrifying speed. Every tactic they tried, the swarm learned and countered. Every weapon they deployed, the swarm absorbed and integrated into itself. When Vexthar retreated with what remained of his forces, he'd lost 40% of the council's military strength. More importantly, he'd lost something he'd carried for 300 years, his certainty. The swarm continued its advance, unstoppable and insatiable. 60 worlds fell in 3 months. Billions of refugees fled toward council core territories, overwhelming every system they entered. The economic prosperity of the past 8 years evaporated as resources were diverted to the war effort and refugee care. Silku Bynes watched the disaster unfold from her trading ship, now converted to refugee transport. She'd made 17 runs, carrying survivors from the frontier worlds to safer systems. Each trip she saw more devastation. Each time she wondered if Marcus had known this was coming. The Dreamweavers certainly had. They'd tried to warn the council, but no one had listened. Now their visions were clearer than ever, and more terrifying. "The silver tide must rise," Whisper of Tomorrow told Silk during one of their meetings, "or everything ends." "The council cannot stop this alone." "The silver tide?" Silk asked. "What does that mean?" But the Dreamweaver couldn't or wouldn't explain further, lost in visions of possible futures. In the council chamber, desperation reached new heights. The Krev Ascendancy's homeworld was now directly in the swarm's path. Vexthar, who had spent 3 centuries building his reputation as the council's wisest voice, now faced the destruction of everything he'd worked to protect. A junior diplomat, barely a century old by council standards, stood during one session and said what many had been thinking but none had dared voice. Contact humanity. They were warriors. They understood violence in ways we don't. Maybe they can help. The chamber erupted in shouting. The suggestion was outrageous, unthinkable. To crawl back to the species they'd expelled 8 years ago? To admit they needed the very chaos and violence they'd rejected? Vexthar's voice cut through the noise. "Absolutely not. We will not beg those savages for help. We have our pride. We have our dignity. We will find another way." But there was no other way, and everyone knew it. The swarm advanced system by system, world by world. Council forces retreated again and again, each battle more desperate than the last. The eldest races, those who had guided the council for millennia, had no answers. Their ancient wisdom meant nothing against an enemy that existed only to consume. 3 months after the junior diplomat's suggestion, the swarm reached the Consensus Prime system. The council's headquarters, the heart of galactic civilization for 10,000 years, came under siege. Billions of beings took refuge on the planet's surface and in orbital stations, waiting for an attack that would almost certainly mean the end of everything they'd built. Council forces prepared for a final stand. Every available ship formed a defensive perimeter around the planet. Vexthar commanded from the flagship Eternal Wisdom, knowing this would likely be his last battle. The swarm emerged from hyperspace like a nightmare made real. Thousands of organic ships, each one pulsing with stolen life force, each one hungry for more. They moved in perfect coordination, a single mind controlling countless bodies, adapting and learning with every passing second. Council ships opened fire, throwing everything they had at the advancing enemy. For a brief moment it seemed like they might actually hold. Then the swarm began to adapt and the slaughter commenced. Vexithar watched his fleet die around him. He gave orders, tried every tactic he knew, but nothing worked. The swarm was simply too strong, too adaptable, too numerous. In another hour, maybe two, they would break through. Consensus Prime would fall. The council would end. He thought about Ambassador Chen Wei, about her final words 8 years ago. "You'll realize too late what you've forsaken." At the time, he dismissed it as the bitter words of a rejected species. Now, with death approaching from all sides, he understood. They'd cast out the one species that might have saved them, all because of pride and fear, and now that pride would kill them all. The eternal wisdom shuddered as a swarm ship latched onto its hull, beginning the process of breaking it down into raw materials. Vexthar prepared himself for the end, mandibles clicking in what might have been a prayer or simply an expression of regret. Then space itself tore open. The tiers in space appeared at 17 points around the Consensus Prime system, not at traditional jump points, but in areas that should have been impossible to traverse. Through these impossible openings came something that made even the Volkreth swarm pause in its consumption. Ships. 10,000 of them. But calling them ships felt inadequate, like calling a star a candle. They were massive, elegant, and utterly alien in design, hulls that seemed to be grown rather than built, flowing with organic curves yet clearly incorporating technology beyond anything the Council had imagined. They shimmered with energy fields that bent light around them, making them hard to focus on directly. The largest vessel emerged last, a dreadnought the size of a small moon. Its surface rippled like liquid metal, and along its flanks, symbols glowed in a script that took Vexithar a moment to recognize. Human writing, the ship's name, Unbroken Dawn. On the bridge of the Eternal Wisdom, Vexthar's communication officer spoke in a trembling voice. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission. It's human." The face that appeared on the main screen made Vexithar's breath catch. She was young, perhaps 30 standard years, with dark hair pulled back in a severe military style. But her eyes were old, carrying a weight that reminded him uncomfortably of Ambassador Chen Wei. When she spoke, the resemblance became clear. "This is Admiral Sophia Chen of the Human Defense Fleet. We're here to end this." She didn't wait for a response. She didn't ask for permission or coordinate with Council forces. The human fleet simply moved into action with a precision that suggested they'd been planning this for years. The swarm, which had paused to assess this new threat, surged forward to meet them. The organic ships that had shrugged off every Council weapon now threw themselves at the human fleet with renewed hunger. What happened next would be analyzed by military historians for centuries, though most would struggle to believe the accounts. The human ships moved through space like dancers, like artists, like the violence and chaos the Council had always feared, made manifest as something beautiful and terrible. They didn't just fly through space. They folded it, twisted it, used it as a weapon. Fighters the size of shuttles phased in and out of normal reality, appearing inside swarm ships and detonating before phasing out again. The larger vessels deployed weapons that seemed to defy physics, gravitational shapers that crushed swarm bioships into singularities, quantum disruptors that severed the hive mind's connections, leaving individual swarm organisms confused and vulnerable, energy weapons that burned with a color Vexthar had never seen before, something beyond the normal spectrum. But it was the human pilots themselves that proved most devastating. Through some technology the Council didn't understand, they'd integrated their nervous systems directly into their ships. They didn't fly their vessels, they became their vessels. The boundary between human and machine had blurred into something new. Vexthar watched as a squadron of human fighters engaged a swarm cluster that had destroyed 3 Council cruisers. The humans moved with impossible coordination, executing maneuvers that should have torn their ships apart from the G-forces alone. They wove between swarm vessels, firing precisely, never wasting a shot, never hesitating. One fighter pilot took a direct hit that should have vaporized their ship. Instead, the vessel's hull flowed like liquid, redistributing the energy, and kept fighting. The pilot's laughter echoed over open channels, wild and fierce and fully alive. The battle raged for 6 hours. 6 hours of the most intense combat Vexthar had witnessed in 3 centuries of military service. The swarm adapted as it always did, learning human tactics, evolving countermeasures. But the humans adapted faster. Every time the swarm found an answer, the humans changed the question. When it ended, the swarm forces around Consensus Prime were annihilated. Not driven off, not temporarily defeated, but completely destroyed. Debris from thousands of swarm ships drifted in orbit around the planet, slowly being collected by human salvage vessels. The Council fleet hung in space, damaged and exhausted, having done nothing but witness humanity's return. Vexthar tried to process what he'd just seen. 8 years ago, humans had possessed good ships and brave soldiers, but nothing like this. They'd evolved beyond anything he could have imagined. He opened a channel to the unbroken dawn. Admiral Chen, on behalf of the Council, we cannot express our gratitude. You saved us. You saved everything. Sophia Chen's face appeared on screen again, and this time Vexithar could see the exhaustion beneath her military bearing. But there was no warmth in her eyes, no joy at being thanked. This wasn't for you, Counselor, she said simply. This was for the innocent, for the billions you couldn't protect, for the species that don't deserve to be consumed because their leaders were too proud to call for help. Please, Vexthar found himself saying, his pride crumbling after 3 centuries of certainty. Please come down to Consensus Prime, let us talk. Let us make this right. No. The word was final. We have work to do. The swarm is still out there, still consuming the frontier worlds. We're going to drive them back, save who we can. You're welcome to help, but we're not waiting for Council approval anymore. The transmission ended. The human fleet began moving, not toward Consensus Prime for rest and resupply, but outward toward the frontier where the swarm still ravaged helpless worlds. They didn't ask for thanks. They didn't seek recognition. They simply did what needed to be done. Silk Hubines, watching from her transport ship in orbit, couldn't believe what she was seeing. She activated every scanner she had, trying to understand the technology behind those impossible ships. Her analysis came back with results that seemed like errors. The ships were partially organic, grown using biological processes that integrated with quantum-forged metals. They existed slightly outside normal spacetime, which explained their ability to move in ways that violated physics. She had to talk to someone, had to understand what humanity had become. Working through old contacts, she managed to get a communication request through to one of the human ships. To her shock, it was answered by a familiar face. Silk. Marcus Chen smiled at her from the screen, though he looked so different now that she almost didn't recognize him. His right arm was entirely mechanical, beautiful in its complexity. His eyes held circuitry that glowed faintly when he blinked. Parts of his skull showed silvery metal beneath translucent skin. It's been a long time. Marcus, what did you do to yourself? The question came out more horrified than she'd intended. He didn't take offense. I became what I needed to be. We all did. When the Council cast us out, we had a choice. We could retreat to our worlds and nurse our wounds, or we could evolve. We chose evolution, but you're not human anymore. I'm more human than I've ever been, Marcus replied. Every enhancement we've made, every modification, it's all voluntary. It's all chosen. We didn't lose ourselves in the machines, Silk. We expanded ourselves. We took the violence and chaos the Council feared and turned it into something that protects instead of destroys. You knew the swarm was coming, Silk realized. That's why you disappeared. You were preparing. Marcus nodded. The Dreamweavers weren't the only ones with visions of the future. We have people who interface with quantum probability streams. They saw dozens of possible futures. In most of them, the swarm arrived and the Council fell. So we prepared, we built, we changed ourselves into something that could stand against the darkness. And now you're saving the Council that rejected you. Like Admiral Chen said, this isn't for them. It's for everyone else. For people like you who spoke up for us even when it cost you. For the billions of innocents who don't deserve to suffer because of the Council's mistakes. Marcus glanced off screen at something. I have to go. We're moving toward the Talesian systems. The swarm is thick there. Marcus, wait. Will I see you again? I don't know, he said honestly. This fight might last years, decades, but if we survive, if we win, maybe we can share some Earth music and Arxian poetry again. Like old times. The transmission ended, leaving Silk alone with her thoughts and the sight of human ships jumping toward the frontier. toward danger, toward the places where the swarm still fed. 1 year after the Battle of Consensus Prime, the council chamber had been rebuilt. The crystalline walls still caught starlight and scattered it across the assembled delegates, but now those walls bore scars from swarm weapons, permanent reminders of how close they'd come to extinction. 200 species sat in their designated sections, but the mood was different from the last time humanity had stood before them. Where there had been confidence and pride, now there was humility and desperation. The Volkreth swarm had been driven back to dark space, but the price had been high. 200 worlds lost, trillions of lives ended, and they all knew, deep in their hearts, that without humanity they would have lost everything. Admiral Sophia Chen stood at the speaker's platform, the same place her grandmother had stood 9 years ago. Behind her floated holographic displays showing the human fleet's victories. 300 battles, 200 worlds liberated, 60 swarm hive clusters destroyed. The human casualties were listed too, and the numbers made even the most hardened council members wince. Humanity had bled for the galaxy, sacrificed thousands of their transformed soldiers to save species that had cast them out. Counselor Vexithar rose from the eldest tier, moving slowly now. The past year had aged him more than the previous century. He looked at Admiral Chen and saw the ghost of Ambassador Chen Wei, a reminder of every mistake he'd made. Admiral Chen, he began, his voice lacking its former authority. On behalf of the Galactic Council, I formally apologize for our treatment of humanity 9 years ago. We were wrong. We were blind. We let fear and pride guide us instead of wisdom. We mistook your passion for weakness. We called your compassion naivety. We feared your potential and named it danger. He paused, letting the words settle across the chamber. Other council members nodded their agreement. Even those who had voted against humanity's expulsion now admitted they should have fought harder to keep them. We were fools, Vexthar continued, and our foolishness nearly cost us everything. Today we wish to make amends. The council unanimously votes to offer humanity full membership status with all honors and privileges. Furthermore, we offer you leadership of our combined military forces, seats in the high chambers, and whatever else you require to help us rebuild. The chamber waited in silence. This was more than had ever been offered to any species in council history. They were essentially giving humanity control over galactic defense and a voice in every major decision. It was an acknowledgement that they needed humanity more than humanity needed them. Admiral Chen listened patiently, her enhanced eyes scanning the assembly. When she spoke, her voice was clear and firm. We appreciate your words, Counselor. We understand the significance of what you're offering, but we must decline. Shock rippled through the chamber like a physical wave. Delegates turned to each other in confusion. The luminous collective dimmed with surprise. Even Vexithar seemed stunned, his mandibles frozen mid-click. I don't understand, Vexithar said. We're offering you everything you asked for 9 years ago and more. Why would you refuse? Sophia stepped forward, her presence commanding despite her small human frame. 9 years ago, my grandmother stood where I'm standing now. She presented 50 years of loyal service and asked for acceptance. You responded by expelling us, by calling us children playing with fire, by treating us like a threat that needed to be contained. You were right, in a way, she continued. We were dangerous. We were unpredictable. We made you uncomfortable because we felt things deeply, because we acted on instinct as much as logic, because we couldn't sit still while the galaxy slowly petrified around us. But you were also wrong. We weren't children. We were partners who desperately wanted to belong. We offered you our loyalty, our innovation, our lives, and you threw it all away because you were afraid of what we might become. Admiral Chen gestured to the holographic displays behind her. Then you cast us into darkness, and in that darkness we found something more valuable than your acceptance. We found ourselves. We discovered what we could be when we stopped trying to fit into your ancient mold and started building something new. Silk Hubines, sitting in the observer section, felt tears forming in her 3 eyes. She'd known this moment was coming, had discussed it with Marcus during their occasional communications over the past year, but hearing it spoken aloud still struck her with its finality. We didn't save you because we wanted you to owe us, Sophia said. We saved you because it was right, because billions of innocent beings didn't deserve to die for the Council's mistakes. We're not interested in your gratitude or your guilt. We're interested in building a better future. She pulled up a new holographic display, It showed a map of the galaxy with dozens of star systems highlighted in blue. 3 months ago, humanity formally announced the creation of the Frontier Coalition. 30 species have already joined us. The Arxians, the Dreamweavers, several of the younger races that felt stifled by council traditions. We've established our own governance structure, our own trade networks, our own defensive pacts. We're open to any species that shares our values, she continued. Action over endless deliberation, innovation over rigid tradition, compassion over protocol. We don't require millions of years of history to join us. We don't care how advanced or primitive you are. We care about what you want to build together. Vexthar's voice shook as he spoke. You're dividing the galaxy, creating a rival power to the council. No, Sophia replied firmly. We're offering an alternative. The council can continue as it always has. You've maintained peace for 10,000 years through stability and caution. That's an impressive achievement, and we're not trying to destroy it. But we're building something different, something faster, more adaptive, more willing to take risks and make mistakes and learn from them. You're welcome to join us, she added, and the invitation shocked everyone in the chamber. Any council species that wants to be part of what we're building, you're invited. You can maintain dual citizenship. But understand that we'll never again seek your approval for our existence. We'll never again stand before you asking to be accepted. A junior delegate from a species called the Kelthani, barely 50 years old in council terms, stood up. What if we want to learn from you? What if we want to integrate some of your technology, your methods? Sophia smiled, the first genuine warmth she'd shown since entering the chamber. Then come talk to us. The coalition welcomes exchange, cooperation, and friendship. We just won't accept subjugation or second-class status. We've earned our place in the galaxy, and we won't let anyone tell us otherwise. The debate that followed lasted for days. Some council members were outraged at humanity's rejection. Others were intrigued by the coalition. Many simply didn't know how to process a species that would turn down what they'd fought so hard to achieve. Over the following months, the galaxy shifted. 12 more species left the council to join the Frontier Coalition. Others maintained membership in both organizations, serving as bridges between the two powers. Trade agreements were negotiated. Defense pacts were signed. Slowly, a new order emerged. Silku Bynes became one of the first non-humans to achieve the rank of Admiral in the Coalition Defense Fleet. She commanded a mixed-species crew on a hybrid ship that incorporated the best of human, Arxian, and Dreamweaver technology. Marcus served as her chief engineer, more machine than man now, but still capable of appreciating good poetry. The council remained, diminished, but surviving. They'd learned their lesson, though it had cost them dearly. They became more flexible, more willing to listen to younger species, more open to change. It wasn't enough to stop the slow migration of innovative species to the coalition, but it kept the council relevant. One evening, 5 years after the Great Refusal, Vexthar sat alone in his private chambers on Consensus Prime. He was old now, ancient even by Krev standards, and he knew his time was ending. He pulled up footage from the Battle of Consensus Prime, watching human ships dance through space with deadly grace. He watched young human pilots throw themselves into impossible situations to save council vessels. He saw them taking hits meant for ships from species that had rejected them. He witnessed them fighting with a ferocity born not from hatred but from love, from a desperate need to protect life even when that life had shown them nothing but contempt. They would have died for us, he whispered to the empty room, before we even earned it, before we even deserved it. He thought about Ambassador Chen Wei's final words about understanding too late what they'd forsaken. The council had sought perfection and found only stagnation. They'd valued stability over growth, caution over courage, tradition over innovation, and in doing so, they'd cast out the one species that could have kept them vital, kept them growing, kept them alive in more than just the physical sense. Humanity had offered them passion, creativity, and boundless potential. The council had rejected it out of fear. Now humanity had built something beautiful from that rejection, something that was already surpassing the council in ways that mattered most. Vexthar deleted the footage and sat in the darkness of his chambers. He would carry his shame to the grave, a final burden for a man who had thought himself wise. The council had taught humanity a harsh lesson about rejection and isolation.